That's a great reminder, because often the excuse we give for not doing something or taking something is there's not enough time. And guess what? Time slips by and you haven't done it. You haven't lived to that full expression of who you are. And so that was a great reminder. That was really a great reminder to live the dream of who you are and all that you want to be. So like this whole series this month is this book, Excuses Begone by Wayne Dyer. And the reminder is that this whole year we're living the life of intention. And to live a life of intention, you have to live on purpose. If you just wait for it to create, you get what you get. There is no intention, there is no direction. The universe has no idea how to respond, because one of the things that we know is like attracts like. What we think is what we see materialize in front of us. And so if you don't have any thoughts, you might not get anything other than just what's going on in race consciousness. By race consciousness, what I mean is that which the general populace is thinking. So oftentimes those of us who watch the news, we start believing everything we see on the news. And you know what sells on news is not sweet little heart, lovey-dovey type pictures, but drama, chaos, death and destruction. And we buy into it and we start thinking that is the world. But that isn't the world. That's just CNN and Fox News. Our world can be different. We can see the world differently, and that's how we see it. And all part of that is that invitation that Wayne Dyer gives is see life through a different lens. And when you see life through a different lens, it gives you an opportunity to show up as your authentic self. So last week, when I was talking about seeing life through a different lens, we invite you to look at your false self. That false self, which is really represented by ego. That false self, which keeps you from living your authentic self. I might have said this last week. Ego stands as an acronym for edging God out. Your ego is edging God out. Your ego is trying to say, I know what's best for you. But when you do that, you're edging God out and you're not in alignment. And alignment is one of the keys to the kingdom that I'm going to talk about today. The first one is awareness. It's awareness of the false self, so you can then open up and let go of that. So you can tune in to the truth of who you are, that authentic being, that expression of the divine, that expression of God. You are that only unique expression. And then the next one is about the alignment. To be absolutely in alignment with the divine. To know that you are one with it. And you feel that connection. You feel like you're in the flow. You know. So one of the things I talked about last week is that two of the excuses we use that keep us from doing this is we believe the material world. We forget that our thoughts have such power. And I remember that I talked about the placebo. That we could use the placebo, and very many medical experiments, they've used them, and people have the same effect with a placebo as they had on either the authentic operation or the authentic pills, because they believed in the power that the pill or the operation gave, even though it was false. So that's the power of our thinking and the power of our thought that's demonstrated. And then the other thing is I read you about 12 of the 18 different excuses we give for not being our authentic self, and I gave you affirmations for them. And so that's the second way to overcome your excuses. Give yourself affirmations. When you always are a choice, right? I was thinking about this recently in my own life. I had something happen that I realized that I didn't know the outcome. But I was at choice. I could either be in the present moment now, which just says, I have no idea, and I could create an affirmation then for what I expected. Or I could go into drama and paint the worst possible picture that could possibly happen, right? So where is the service to myself in that? There is none. There is no payoff. Because my thoughts could absolutely manifest that, if that's what I believe and think. So I'm at choice. And when I'm at choice, I know that same truth for all of you. You're at choice when you are confronted with something that's going on that you do not know the outcome. It's up to you to decide. And you can decide on that by creating the positive outcome that you really desire and attach an affirmation to that. And the first attachment I always make is, I am one with the divine. Because that's my anchor. That's my alignment. That's the truth of who I am, and that's the truth of who I know. And that gives power to my affirmation. You know, he also used a quote from Henry David Thoreau, who said, I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of man to elevate his life by a conscious endeavor. Now that's important because there are 4 words in that quote that I just said. And he used them in this book, and the first one is encouraging. And so he says that this book is encouraging you to challenge patterns and feel inspired. Challenge the patterns of your thought. Some of us use the patterns of our thought from our existence, our family dynamics, how we've lived our life in the past. And the idea is challenge those thinkings. Challenge yourself to let go of that because you don't really know that that is true anymore in the present situation. And then the other thing is that you have an unquestionable ability to eliminate excuses. When you catch yourself making excuses, call yourself on it. Be your own police force. Be the person that comes up and says, you don't know that that's true. And challenge your excuse to be open to a new expression. And then elevate is the next word. Elevate your life by taking responsibility for who you are. I talk to people and listen to people who talk about what's going on with their life. When I say, how's it going, what's going on in your life, and I'm in a counseling session, and they're sitting there and they start telling me about their life. Almost none of it is about what they're doing. Almost all of it is what's being done to them. Now, it may not get expressed that way. They may not even be aware that they're in victim consciousness. That's my label. That I think that they're in victim consciousness. Because what they're saying is that the world is in control of their actions. Their world is in control of what's happening to them. And what we know as science of mind is that's just not true. If your thoughts really manifest in your world, it's what you're thinking. So the next thing we have to do is get them to accept responsibility for their life. And I have to tell you, that's one of the toughest things to do. Because it's hard sometimes. Sometimes things do just happen. And they're just not really, you just don't see the good in them at that time. I have a basic belief that there's good in everything. It all comes from God. If it all comes from God, there's good in it. I just may not see it now. And if I could pull out far enough away from it, I would see the good eventually. I believe that. But we have to move into that trust and that faith. And then the last thing is you can bring your desires to consciousness by disconnecting the power from your subconscious so it doesn't run your life. When I talked about that last week, I said there's studies that say anywhere from 85 to 95% of your life is run by your subconscious mind. You are only 5 to 15% consciously directing your life. And so the idea is about breaking into that subconscious and becoming aware so you can start changing things. So the 7 key principles he talks about is become aware of your potential for greatness and the power of your mind. Isn't that wonderful? Be aware of the greatness and the power of your mind. And then align yourself by thinking like God thinks. If you are one with God, why can you not think like God? How can there be separation? Do you believe in dualism? We say no. There is no dualism. There is no separation. It's only the ego that engages in separation. And then live here and in the now. Eckhart Tolle wrote a book, Now. It was one of the most dramatic books that affected my life about 10 years ago. I was having a struggle in the summertime, and I picked that book up and I studied it. I used it as a workbook over 2 months. And from the beginning until the end was 180 degrees difference. Because I accepted responsibility and I was absolutely in the present moment now. He gives an example in the book in there about being in the now moment. Wayne Dyer, some of you may know, now lives in Hawaii. I guess he used to live in Florida. Now he lives in Hawaii. Has for quite a number of years. And he swims in the ocean for exercise. Well, what he was saying in there is that sometimes he gets so caught up in all the projects that he has going on that he's worrying about his to-do list, and he's worrying about this, and he's worrying about that. And I've been there, and sometimes I go there quite often. I visit that place. I'm no stranger. You may not be either. Not to my place, but to your place. Yeah, we all have our little bags of worries. But anyway, he worried about that, and he'd find a tightness in his chest. But as he was going out for a swim, when he found this tightness and he was worrying about these different things, he said, you know, I'm going to practice what I'm working on. I'm going to practice living in the now. Now, living in the now is letting go of the judgment and just observing and letting think. He felt he had this tightness in his chest. He had all this stuff going. And he was worried about how cold the water was. He was worrying about whether the current was going to be fighting him or going with him. He let go of all of that. He got in the water, and what he noticed is the tightness in his chest disappeared. And he found that he was in the flow of the water. He found that when he was in the present now and didn't worry about anything, he didn't resist it. He didn't resist his thoughts. He just let them go like the water. And then he found that he was absolutely in the now. Everything dissolved. And he came out of the water an hour later just totally refreshed, totally energized, because he was totally present. And then the other thing that one of the keys is contemplate what you are rather than what you want to become. That ties into the now thing. Because sometimes what we want to become is so futuristic, it's not attached to where you are now. It's like writing gratitude journals. When you write gratitude journals for what you're grateful for, what you have, it allows the universe to give you more of it. You're not in that futuristic piece. And then be willing to allow, be willing to be open and be willing to allow things to happen in your life, for you know that you're in alignment with the divine. And then be passionate. Be passionate about everyone and everything, because your passion will motivate you and infect you. When I say infect you with joy and happiness. And then want more for others than you do for yourself. When you want more for others than you do for yourself, it opens up a whole different attitude because it's not me-focused. There's nothing wrong with taking care of yourself, but when you get too me-focused, then you can't really be aware of what's going on with other people. There was this, the second principle that he talks about in there in alignment. He talks about the divine guidance. And for those of us who practice this alignment, you'll know that there is this inner voice. May not always be a verbal voice, but it's there for you. And it's like your GPS. But it's your God positioning system. It positions and aligns you with yourself, for you're that one divine presence of God. And you just open up and be willing to hear it and willing to listen to it. He tells a story about the principle of being in contemplation. Because when we contemplate, what we realize is that we bring into our manifestation that which we're thinking about. And one of the stories he uses in there is Do you know that when you get into an airplane now, do you realize that's only been around for 120 years? Now, in the whole scheme of things, that we're in 2015, is that not correct? And the airplane's only been around for less than 120 years. The Wright brothers flew at Kitty Hawk whenever. But they had an idea. They did not believe the common ideal. They did that. And when I was looking at that, I started to think, for some reason, I thought, oh my gosh, 100 years ago, what happened 100 years ago? Do you know, it's a very surprising thing, less than 100 years ago, women were not allowed to vote in this country.
Absolutely.
Is that not amazing? That's true. Before Velva was born when women were not allowed to vote in this country.
Could stand for that.
And do you know what's so very interesting about that? It took somebody to think about it, contemplate it, and then be willing to take action and then trust in that alignment. What I found interesting when I was looking at that is it was actually ratified on August 26, 1920. But it took a whole year after Congress passed it for all the states to ratify it. It was not an act that people took willingly. Guess who was in charge? So when we think about things consciously, things happen, whether it's airplanes or women allowed to vote. It starts with the contemplation. He uses another thing where his daughter, Serena, was graduating from university, and she and a friend wanted to start some kind of a musical comedy program. And they were looking for a producer, and they were having trouble getting a producer. And Wayne Dyer was running to an appointment in New York. And if any of you have been into New York, finding space or finding a place to if you're not using a cab, there's parking's almost impossible. But he was running into the building for this appointment. He was running late. He got into the doors. He's running towards the elevator, and the elevator door is shutting. And at the last moment, a hand steps out and opens the door back up. He walks in the elevator, and the person who opened up the door for him was his production executive from one of the networks, who he knew, who had seen his daughter Serena perform at his home in Hawaii 15 years before. And at that time said, "You are so amusing, you are so laughable, that if you ever decide to do anything online or a production, I will support you." So Wayne Dyer, not missing a chance to be the great father that he was, reminded him of that and set up the meeting and set up the arrangement. But it's about contemplation. The daughter had this strong contemplation, put it into the universe, put it into the father. I mean, what is the chance that that would happen? It is this magnetic force, a like thinking, that draws it into our own existence. And then Thomas Troward, he talks about Thomas Troward. Now that's important to us because Ernest Holmes was really dramatically affected by Troward. Troward was a British judge who wrote Mental Science. And he wrote it in the, well, let's see, he said here he wrote it about 1910. I was thinking it was earlier than that, but that's only 105 years ago. Everything happens in 100 years, I guess. Anyway, he said that there's 4 parts to this that's so important, and this is from Troward, and Troward shows up in Science of Mind and shows up in Ernest Holmes, our founder. He says there's 4 points. Spirit is created by self-contemplation. The process of moving from non-being to being involves an invisible source which we call spirit. And then, so what it contemplates, the second point is, so what it contemplates itself as being, it becomes. That's why thought is so important. What it contemplates, it becomes. So when you are in this alignment with the divine, and it's what you contemplate. And you are individualized spirit. That's the third point. When you remember that, you are this individualized spirit. There's nobody else that can be this oneness that you are. And as you contemplate the law of your own being, it becomes the law of your being. Do you understand that? When you contemplate your own being, it becomes that. It cannot be otherwise because your thought manifests that way. the willingness. This is the fifth key, the fifth principle, the willingness. And there are 4 here that I would like you to think about this when I say them, and internalize that yourself. Ask yourself, am I willing to take total responsibility for all the conditions of my life? That's a big one. Am I willing to take responsibility for all the conditions of my life? And the next one is even more difficult for type A people that I used to be, sometimes still am. Am I willing to surrender? Am I willing to surrender, ridding myself of excuses and vows of receptivity, turn yourself over to something greater than your own little ego? When I teach Science of Mind treatments to people, I tell them the 5th step is letting go. And believe it or not, that's one of the toughest things because they keep wanting to tinker with it. One day they keep saying, well, what if it doesn't work? They don't trust God. That's tough. They think they can outthink God. So surrender. Surrender into that. Be willing to surrender. And then are you willing to hold a vision? So like his daughter Serena held a vision that she wanted to birth this production that she wanted to do. And she held a vision and she committed to it and she showed up. And then are you willing to shed all your unwillingness? Are you willing to give up all your excuses? Are you willing to say, I totally am willing to be all that I can be. I'm willing to be that expression. And there's about passion. And I love that's another thing is have passion. If you could memorize these 4 words, passion always trumps excuses. And why I like this one is when I take it personal. And I take it personal because it's my passion for teaching Science of Mind and taking it out to the world is why I'm here. When I came here less than 2 years ago, there was like 17 people thinking about whether they were going to disband this center or not. Because I had a minister that was going to step down. They asked if I would do it. And then I said yes. I would take it on for 3 months. But what I found is when I step in, even though I still remember my first Sunday, there were only 11 people, and I was standing up here like this saying, what have I done? But what I was doing is I was answering a call that was so deep within me that excites my passion and my enthusiasm. I have a passion for teaching Science of Mind. I have a passion for making changes, allowing people to see tools to change their life. So it makes a difference for me, and I want to share that. So I do that. So when you have a passion for something, somebody telling you it doesn't make any sense, and I had a couple of people tell me that, you ignore it. It doesn't enter your field of consciousness because it doesn't fit your dream. It doesn't fit your passion. You let it go. You do that which really excites you. And then the last principle is compassion. And he uses this beautiful story, which I think is so interesting because it touches at the very heart of compassion. He tells a story that there was a traveler that approached a mountain, and there was a lady sitting next to a stream. And she had found this beautiful gem in the river and had put it amongst her possessions. And the traveler came up and he stopped and he was talking to her and he asked her for a gift, and she said, yes, whatever you want. He said, I'd like that gem, because he knew that that gem, when he took it back, would provide him with an abundance of life, that he had no more worries in life. And she said yes, and she just gave it to him. And he walked away and he returned later on, and he gave her he said, I'm returning your stone, your gem. And she says, why? He said, you have a more valuable gift that I want from you. And she said, what is that? He says, I want you to teach me the compassion that would allow me to give away my most precious gift to somebody. So when we do that, when we give of ourselves because of the love that we have or the compassion we have for somebody else, we move outside of ourselves and we move into that greater expression of the whole, of that divine one with God that we all are. Let me close with this. The Michael Gott, a musical director, former musical director in Dallas, and now the senior associate minister in Unity in Houston, wrote the daily guides in this month. And what I liked about that is we sometimes forget that. We make all these excuses about why we can't do things. And he quotes Ernest Holmes, which I love this one. Ernest Holmes says, "As deep cries unto deep, so my thought cries unto thee, and thou dost answer." As deep cries unto deep, so my thought cries unto thee, and thou dost answer. That's the divine connection. And Michael goes on to say, "We are more than as a parent to ourselves. We are eternal expression of the infinite life born into space and time to discover God through the experience of a human lifetime. This is deep calling unto deep." Thank you.